All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with our meeting of the Charter Review Committee. Before we dive into the agenda, I actually was going to prepare some remarks, but I didn't, so I'll just speak, off the cuff. So as you know, I sent out an email earlier this week that Jim Byers, who was a member of our committee, passed away Tuesday afternoon, suddenly, unexpectedly. Not only was Jim a really valuable member of this committee, and I think we all really enjoyed working with him. He was also a longtime personal friend of mine, so it's been an especially challenging week to navigate all of this. Jim was something of an icon in this town. A lot of people knew him and loved him and respected him. He filmed for Cat TV and was at, a lot of community events, a lot of municipal events, and was always just a jolly guy, in a pretty positive mood almost all the time. And always willing to put his hand out, help somebody else, and I don't know. I'm gonna miss him terribly. I know that the work we're doing here is gonna be so much better because of what he's contributed to it and his involvement. There was some discussion around whether we should meet today or not meet today. I went and spoke with his wife Jeannie on Wednesday afternoon, and her and I both agreed that that's not what Jim would have wanted. He was really dedicated to this work, so I know it's likely going to be difficult to move on from here. I think it's supposed to be difficult, and thank you, Jim. Does anyone else want to share something about Jim?
So what I'd like to add about Jim is, with me being relatively new, everybody's got their opinions about this town, and I can assure you that when I first moved here, a lot of people said, or when I was looking at places, don't come here. They all had a lot of negative things to say, and Jim was one of the first people that I met in a different group setting, that you could just tell how proud he was to be be here in Bennington, and him along with everybody on this charter committee has made, calling this place home a great experience, and his energy and enthusiasm for caring for the people of this town is going to be missed by everybody in this town. So, may he rest in peace.
Anyone else? Dan, Stu?
Yeah, I think you said it beautifully.
Yeah.
We should leave it.
Okay. Our first item on the agenda is approving the minutes of October 9th. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make it.
Second. Any changes, omissions, errors on those minutes? Those are the minutes of the public forum that we had. Nancy Lively takes fantastic minutes. I did have one thing on this. On lines 284 to 289, the last public comment here shows the comment and my response. When I read through the minutes here, it sort of seemed like I answered a different question than was asked. I went back and reviewed the footage of that forum, and I think maybe I did a little misunderstand the question, but I do want to mention that when Mary Ellen Munley introduced her question, she did introduce it in the context of CPARB, the challenges that CPARB has had getting community involvement with their board, and so it was a little unclear to me, actually, even reviewing the footage several times, that her question was or wasn't about CPARB's need for community involvement versus our need for community involvement. So I'm not sure still, actually, if her question was about this group getting community involvement or CPARB getting community involvement. But I just wanted it reflected in the minutes that it was that question was preceded with that context. Any other changes to the minutes from October 9th?
Once again, I missed who seconded the motion.
Okay.
Okay. I should start to know that. RSMN.
All right. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended from October 9th? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. The minutes are accepted.
Oh, I just have a question before
Yeah.
we move on. For those who weren't in attendance, should they abstain?
I just thought about that after I voted, but I probably should. I did read the minutes.
You are not required to
Yeah.
abstain
Okay.
even if you were not at the meeting.
I did read them, so I thought they were great.
Okay.
And I watched the recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's a good question.
All right. Next up, the minutes from October 11th. That's our regular committee meeting here from last week. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from October 11th?
So moved.
Second, Michael. Thank you. Any changes or corrections to the minutes from October 11th?
I just have one. This is in the second to last paragraph. Near the end, it says community policing ? CPARB. I don't believe that question mark should be there.
It's supposed to be a slash.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, if you don't capitalize it, it comes out right.
What's the general process around like spelling corrections? I mean, they don't change the meaning of the minutes, do they?
No, but if you find it, just let me know.
Yeah. So, towards the bottom of the first page, the line beginning "talking to council." The end of that line says, "Our Centner believes contacts define expectations for both sides." I think that should be contracts.
Yes, it should be.
And then,
And that wouldn't have been caught on spell check because it contacts is a word.
and then I think 2 lines below that, the line starts term limits for select
Right.
board. It looks like there's an I
Yeah,
in
there is.
termy.
Thank you.
I had a comment. It's
Yeah.
not a request for modification. I just want to remind us all or note that, obviously minutes are not a transcript. They are not everything. And I wanted to just point that out where it says, about my comment on the topic of listening sessions and community opportunity to speak and communicate with the select board. So it says I said that I believe there are sufficient opportunities to address issues before the community, but I mean, I think it was a much more rich, sort of discussion and nuanced and everything. So again, I appreciate the minutes are important to me for skimming and then looking at the recording to fully understand the sort of detail of the conversation. So
Sure.
that's just my comment, but no request for amendment.
Okay. Anything else on the minutes from October 11th? All right. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended from October 11th? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Minutes from October 11th will be accepted. Our next agenda item is a review of public comments. I again apologize, this one escaped me. There are public comments from this week. I am happy to I will attempt to read them. And I will make sure you all get a copy of these. First public comment from Jan Blair. If people that aren't U.S. citizens and younger people are allowed to vote, what about people that live in Bennington for 6 months and pay a lot of money in taxes and own a very large farm for the last 40 years? We should also be allowed to vote. I think we will refer that to voting committee. I think
They could declare their residence here and vote.
Yeah, I mean,
That's my
they're assuming.
comment.
So is that assuming? Just off of the auditory, they're a taxpayer for 40 years, but are not a resident of Bennington.
it says they live in Bennington for 6 months. I don't know if that's
So
6 months out of a
That's what I
year.
wanted, 6 months out of the year. So a non-primary resident.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's.
You have to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
It's like
you get
it's
to
like
vote somewhere, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you live out of state, you go snowbird somewhere, you're still voting in your home state. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you got to choose one or the other. But I'll address it.
Yeah.
Sounds like you did.
All in favor?
Second comment is from, I apologize in advance, Sarah Al-Janabi. Topic on allowing non-citizen taxpayers and Bennington residents age 16 and older to vote in municipal elections. The comment says, "Hi Sarah, your statement is wonderful. I made a few edits. Please take a look and see if you agree with the changes. My name is Sarah Al-Janabi and I am a refugee who recently resettled in Bennington. I came from Iraq after a long service with the U.S. military. It was this service and sacrifice for the United States and its freedoms that caused me to be a refugee and leave Iraq. Since I arrived, I've kept learning about my rights and my responsibilities in my new home. The first thing that I learned is that I will not have the right to vote until I become a U.S. citizen. Even if I have a permanent resident card, green card, the first thing that comes to my mind is how newcomers will consider this town their new home, where they have responsibilities like working and paying taxes, but they don't have a simple right like voting in local elections. People who are not yet citizens can join the military to defend, protect, and serve this country, but they can't vote. For me, home is a place where you have rights and responsibilities. As a new resident of Bennington who considers this place my new home, I do believe that I should have the right to vote in the local elections, as I have the responsibility to pay taxes. I would like the right to choose the people who will represent me, who will manage and administer the town budget, and who is working to make Bennington a better place. I really hope this committee will take my comment into consideration and work to make this happen. Thank you."
Send it my way.
Yep. We'll send this to voting and certainly take that into consideration.
You don't want to make a ruling on this, Mike?
The only comment I would have is, I, for the public and for us, as we mentioned in the last public meeting, just being careful to generalize paying taxes as one blanket because it's a multi-layered dynamic situation. So that's just, that's my ruling for the day.
Okay. It's a good one.
What troubled me about that statement is I don't know who added to it.
I agreed.
I mean, somebody indicates that they added to it, and then we don't know who that was.
Oh, is that
We can
a,
go back to Sarah too.
okay.
Yeah,
But
so
something-
I'll just, the beginning of the comment says, "Hi Sarah, your statement is wonderful. I made a few edits. Please take a look and see if you agree with the changes. My name is Sarah Aljanabi."
Okay, so that might have just been a translation interpretation.
It could have been,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean,
But it looks like,
It's a clear message enough. And
Yeah.
we can,
the message
I mean, again,
stands on its own.
and there are three of us on the committee. We'll talk
Yeah.
about all of this.
Yeah.
Do we know if there was one of the individuals in the audience?
I
Don't know.
Don't know.
Okay, I was just wondering.
don't know, but I believe it's not the individual that came up and spoke
No,
during the
definitely.
session.
No, I
Definitely.
wasn't talking about, but maybe the same organization or they're part of the same
Yeah,
coalition.
unclear,
You know,
yeah.
that I guess that's what I'm.
Well, yeah.
I don't know.
I think the young man who spoke was Afghani,
Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Yes.
all right.
and she's Iraqi.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot to go through on that. So.
Okay.
The third and final public comment we received this past week was from Maria Corrales on the topic of allowing non-citizen taxpayers and Bennington residents aged 16 and older to vote in municipal
More popular.
elections. Her comment reads, "Recap, Charter Review Session, Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. Issues Charter Committee must address. Their argument, U.S. Constitution supremacy, general voting, state constitution supremacy, state voting, charter supremacy, local voting. Public argument, state constitution requires someone to be a U.S. citizen to vote on state matters. The big question, are local votes truly local issue only? We know state of Vermont has powers over all municipal schools, standards, curriculum, funding, distribution, equal access, quality, and holding school districts accountable through State Board of Election, which establishes regulations, compliance with state laws." There's a pin emoji. "Therefore, how will Charter separate voting on town budgets when it also addresses schools governed by state laws? We also know many non-residents are supported by state funds, including required to follow strict compliance with state laws." Pin emoji. "Therefore, how will Charter separate non-residents wanting to vote yet supported by the state and governed by state laws? Issues Charter Committee must address. Non-residents, undocumented illegal entry, non-residents, refugees assisted to arrive, non-residents, paying taxes, corporations, non-residents, paying taxes, refugees, non-residents, self-employed, not paying tax, non-residents, supported by state funds, public argument. How will town charter address each category above?" Pin emoji. Logistic nightmare tracking each category, including potential lawsuits. Issues Charter Committee must address. 16 to 17 age votes, born citizens and nationalized. 16 to 17 age votes, green card holders. 16 to 17 age votes, refugees. 16 to 17 age votes, undocumented illegal entry. Public argument, if 16 and 17-year-olds cannot be tried as adults when they commit murder because they don't have cognitive abilities, including maturity to understand consequences and responsibilities, then why does Charter Committee believe they suddenly acquired these skills with decisions made tied to voting? Pin emoji. They don't have cognitive abilities, including maturity sometimes, but other times they do?
I would just like to say that that was a very thorough public comment, and I appreciate the vigor in which Maria participates in this process. And I wish there was more people that expressed the same go-get 'em attitude about it. And we'll take
We'll
it under
discuss as
consideration.
a
Yeah,
committee,
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, I echoed that. I really have appreciated her
Yeah.
involvement in the process, and you know, it'd be great to have more people
100%.
offer their perspectives. The only other comment that I have in reading through this, not necessarily related to Maria's comment specifically, and I think we've probably noticed this in some of the other comments that have come in as well, but it appears to me that some of the formatting that someone might include in their comment sort of gets lost when they between the time that they submit that comment and when it comes to us over email. So like line breaks get removed, and sometimes I think that's part of what's contributed to the challenge we've had understanding the meaning of some of these comments. So if there's a way to address that for future comments, that would be great. I'll plan to mention that to Jonah, who I think manages that form, but just a general note that I've noticed for a few of our comments. Okay, other thoughts on public comment review?
I would just remind everybody that, you know, we're almost halfway through. So, part of the remaining second half is us proposing, you know, ideas or suggestions, referrals. So for the public, now's the time to get your comments in, participate in the second listening session that we're going to provide. We welcome it. You know, it's part of the process. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we will continue on to our third agenda item, looking at questions for council. We have a handout that contains a number of questions that were sent to me. Sort of tried to like format this a little bit, but we can maybe look through this and add to it, I guess. I think the idea was that Meryl would visit with us next week, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
If she's available.
If she's available.
We can't guarantee that, but
Yeah.
we can certainly get these questions to her so she can.
Okay. Should we contact Meryl?
No, let me do that.
Okay, okay. So I think maybe if we can take a look at these today and make sure it's complete, add anything to it that we need so that we can provide this to Meryl this afternoon. All right, so I generally split this into like a couple topic sections as we have most of the other work that we've done here. We did have a number of questions on a potential employment agreement for town manager. That group sent along the bullet points here: experience with employment agreements, usual out clauses and terms. Are there boilerplate agreements available for the select board? Does the select board have this authority and option already without a charter change? The likelihood of passing charter changes through legislation. And then this one below that does not have a bullet point was one that I added here. Just because that sort of remains a question for me. Our charter states the town manager may be dismissed without cause. We've heard this conflicts with state employment law. Statutory construction seems to indicate the charter provision would prevail. I think that would be a great point for her to clarify for us as well. Some of the bullet points here feel like they might be looking for her opinion, not necessarily like a legal opinion. For example, the likelihood of passing charter changes through legislation. I don't know that she'll have a great perspective on that. It doesn't hurt to ask, I guess, but thoughts from the group on any of these questions?
Well, since I'm the author of the
Mhm.
bullet points, I'm looking for her opinion. I'm not asking her to make a legal determination.
Sure.
These are things that, the two things that were key to me here were the fact, does the select board have this power already?
Mhm.
Why do we even have, if that's the case, why even go down this road if they've always had that option?
Yep.
And the fact that even if we did introduce something, would the legislation even pass it? Would they kick it right back and say, well, you can do this on your own?
Yeah.
If the position became open. So that's where I was coming from.
That just makes me think, so if I feel like we talked about this last time, that there are other towns that have some sort of agreement in place. Could we look at that town charter and see if it's written in there or not? As a way to kind of do some of our own due diligence on that,
Yeah, we also talked about experiences other towns had once they did this. So,
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah,
to find out
yeah.
if it's part of the town charter or not. If we looked at one that has a contract and then looked in your charter and saw if it was in the charter, then we would know the legislation would have already,
no, it's a good point.
to find out if the legislation.
If you want to go online, Title 24 appendices
Okay,
has all of the charters
Oh.
and other legal agreements that exist. So if you were to look at, similar sized communities,
yeah,
I think Montpelier they have a contract manager. I think he serves under a contract. I know Hartford's manager serves under a contract. So you could just grab those.
Brattleboro.
Brattleboro, I think, yes, they
Okay.
probably have a contract. So you can see whether the language is right in their charter. And they're all there.
okay, thank you.
I think this is all on point, and I think she'll have really significant experience. The only thing I would maybe add to it, or we can just ask in person, is, I imagine there's there's a couple ways to do it. Obviously, there might be like A, B, and C, and so getting her take on the trade-offs, the pros and cons of each one, and those considerations would be like a follow-up question I would have for her.
I think this is thorough enough that a conversation with Meryl in person, that she'll be prepared and understand what we want to talk about. I think our main thing is we want to make sure she if there's any research she does have to do ahead of time,
Yeah.
she can do that and bring
Exactly.
that to us. We don't have to ask every single nuanced question
Okay.
in this, I don't think.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping.
But I mean, I think this is great. That's
Yeah,
this
this is
hits
good.
all the points that she may have to do some work on to be
Yeah.
prepared to answer our other questions that might arise from
Well,
that.
the thing I'm hoping is that she may say, well, why didn't you ask this?
Yeah.
It's the things I didn't ask.
Yeah.
Mm.
As part of that become problematic, just based on her
Yeah.
experience.
She should say that the big real issue is
Yeah. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the aha
Yeah.
moment that I would hope
Perfect.
for. It's okay if you don't like the bullet points.
No, I think it's on point. I'm not going to change anything.
I like
That's good.
A couple questions here related to voting. How much latitude do we have to define what a non-U.S. citizen resident is? Are there legal barriers to lowering the voting age to 16 or 17 in municipal elections? And are we allowed to implement a different voter registration process for these populations to allow eligibility verification outside of the state system, which does not currently support these populations? Do we have to allow same-day registrations for these populations? Can we require them to present a green card or state-issued ID when registering?
Those are great.
I think they're great questions.
Yeah. It's a dead on point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just felt that they would address concerns that have been expressed, and then I think the general feeling of everyone, which is we want everything to be as secure and, verified as possible. So, in my perfect world, we'd all have to show up with a driver's license to vote, period. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Any additional questions on voting, or I guess topics that aren't covered here? Properties, there's a few here. Current charter grants Bennington voters authority to assess a 1% rooms tax. Would this tax apply to short-term rentals? More specifically, could the voters approve a 1% local option tax that targets short-term rentals only, but not more traditional hotel motel rooms? Something that has come up in our meetings before. The property subcommittee is considering a charter amendment to section
TBD.
yeah.
Or I didn't look it up.
That would state the town of Bennington's lien priority in the case of vacant properties where X would supersede any other lien holders on the property. What's the
Maybe
ethics?
was it just getting the legal verbiage?
That was going to be workshopped more by us via email. But yeah, outlining the current thinking about sort of the lien superseding and her feedback on that, because we know it's not maybe a town level issue in some people's view. But
Was it intentional to limit this to vacant properties, or would it be, you could have properties that aren't vacant that you still want the lien to have a priority.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just properties. I just, because in our multiple discussions, we never said only vacant properties should have the lien priority.
Well, like,
Because that's
true.
fairly difficult to determine, because it's not really vacant, but it's either a lien priority or it's not, if we've got a court order for a court.
I think that
code
is
Yeah, I
violation.
think
more
that's an
accurate
oversight,
to
and I
the-
think that's, yeah.
property
to
that is
the
like
intention
derelict
of
in
our-
some fashion.
Yeah.
So just remove vacant.
Yeah, but I don't think we want to have to make a determination
Yeah.
whether it's vacant or derelict or
Yeah.
anything. It's just, if we get a lien, it should have priority.
Yeah. Yep.
Say we, the town of Bennington, or any other municipality.
So we'll just maybe strike vacant.
Yeah.
on that, yeah.
Yeah.
Their feedback.
Property subcommittee would like information on Vermont towns' experiences with adding local tax options into charters concerning vacant properties, commercial and residential, and short-term rentals. Property subcommittee would like information on Vermont towns' experience with adding registries into charters, not just in ordinances concerning vacant properties, commercial and residential, and short-term rentals. I do know that I believe it's Williston has in their charter a requirement for registering a registry for short-term rentals, as well as licensing for short-term rentals. So that might be worthwhile. I'm sorry, not Williston, Winooski.
My only question on this one is this a question that you guys do want to ask? Because we already have this authority under our current charter. So you want to make it an explicit requirement? That's just,
Yeah.
because I think we can answer that question right now. If you want to put it in the charter, you can, but it's already, the select board already has that authority.
Does it need to be more defined?
Yeah, I think what I was interested in here is empowering ordinance, or elevating the issue, since some of the limitations in the ordinance have to do with resourcing and enforcement and bandwidth. And just I see her, part of her expertise is just like precedent, like what else has happened. So that's what I was curious about.
And I get what you're saying, is say, if it's in the charter, then then you have to do it. Resource issues, you got to figure it out. I guess I'm seeing now where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And just like, if there's any other ways to,
Okay.
that's
I just want to make clear that if the select board wanted to pass these ordinances, additional ordinances, or strengthen the ordinances we have tomorrow, they could do that under the current charter. So I just don't want there to be any confusion there.
Okay.
But we lacked authority. I understand what you're saying. You may want to elevate it.
elevate it, permanentize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
something
make it
you can't
even
ignore.
faster than the select board might be able to do as an ordinance. Like, I don't know if, I haven't talked to the select board about how fast they might be, or how they might be prioritizing that particular ordinance or not. This could be a sort of a fast track way to
So ordinances can be
progress.
passed virtually immediately. They take effect within 30 days, correct, Stuart? You don't have to have a vote
Select
of
board
the,
ordinances are 60 days.
60 days.
60 days.
You don't have to have a vote of the populace, so
Yeah.
you can move fairly quickly with ordinances. I understand what you're saying is once it's memorialized in the charter, you can't ignore it anymore, but.
Or if it's not planned to be on the agenda for 2 years or something. But that discussion of such the present ordinance.
It forces it.
I personally think it's like really important. So, whatever.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I'm gonna go briefly. I'll probably be right back. I
Okay.
have to deal with the baby thing.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay.
You still do.
The other piece of that, I guess, is where Winooski also like requires like a licensing fee for short-term rentals. Could that also be done through an ordinance?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
definitely.
We already, the town already has that authority, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any feedback on legality of town requiring higher court minimums for vacant property negligence violations and waiving or transferring environmental liability away from towns? Almost definitely not legal or acceptable, but topic for discussion.
I think that's your answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Topic for
Again,
discussion.
she just is she has such a great perspective, and
Yeah,
those
yeah,
are
no,
two other types of solutions
Yeah.
in her toolbox. That
It's great to talk to her and she might say,
wanna
okay,
raise.
here's some other options or here's some things.
exactly.
Might support an
You just-
idea.
Yeah, like 3 towns just got sued on this. We'll be like, cool, like that's what we thought.
At least she knows the topic that you're gonna wanna
Exactly.
talk about and she can be prepared, yeah.
And yeah, other things. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Any additional sort of topics that we might want to discuss with Meryl on properties?
Oh, actually, I did have one more that crossed my mind since this, which was, I don't know if, I feel like in some of my discussions, including one recently, there's a notion that commercial vacant property owners get some sort of tax break for being vacant, but I couldn't recall from our
Oh.
discussions if we've clarified
In my
that.
research, I have found nothing that points to you can sit and get the write-off of
Right.
having a building sit there.
Right.
And anything else I read was just like you're not getting to claim the income, so there doesn't seem to be an incentive to have a building sit there empty. The incentive seems to be to let everybody else have the market go up, and then you do nothing, and then your property is worth more because of the efforts of other people.
Okay. Okay.
I had heard something along these lines. It maybe doesn't apply to like an entire building sitting vacant, but you know, a large building that has several commercial spaces. If one of them is not rented, then I think there's probably some tax strategy where the lost income from the unrented property like offsets your profit from the other spaces or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely a question for an accountant.
Yeah, it's an account.
But I can tell you from talking to some property owners, they say, well, it's cheaper for me not to rent it than to fix it up and rent it. So I don't know where that comes from.
Right.
I'm not an accountant. I don't own any
Okay.
buildings other than my own house, so Meryl may have some information on that, but
Yeah.
probably an accountant is a better person to
In
ask that particular
appraisal
question.
circles where buildings are commercial or multifamily, you can argue the income approach.
Mhm.
But if, you know, that's a speculative income approach, and if you're not meeting that, you could argue that your building should be devalued for
Oh,
real estate
okay.
purposes, but more than likely would not succeed simply because it's vacant.
That's just a property tax. I don't think
It's a
that's.
property tax.
It's not a property
tax.
tax game. It's an income and
Yeah, it is
capital
a-
gain.
yeah.
Okay,
It's a
okay.
capital gain.
Yeah, and I mean, some
Okay.
people seem to use like an empty property as, like you said, a way to balance income that's coming from
No.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
So there's,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Okay. I just was
we don't
realizing.
have any real estate moguls in here.
No.
Yeah, I was just realizing that. Well, I had heard from someone else say they get a tax break for it to being vacant, and I didn't feel like I knew enough to say that's not true. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that was where I don't know.
And I would say, from a property tax perspective, that's probably not true.
Right, I just want to be
Sure,
able to
yeah.
be, you know, confident in.
Local
in
property
the
tax,
outcome.
yes, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Local and school tax.
I'll give you a distorted accountant's perspective.
Mm.
Is that a lot of people use these properties because they can write off a lot of things as an investment property. And if it's vacant, you have all the tax benefits of that write-off, and place isn't depreciating on you because there's nobody in it. So some people take the properties as an investment property, and it opens up a million things you can write off.
So there it is, it's a write-off.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
And
that makes
they're
sense.
not having to depreciate it, so their basis isn't being reduced, so when they sell it, they don't have to get hit by as much capital gains.
That's right.
So that's the key right there.
Okay.
Okay. See, we have.
Can we
finance
interview you
expert.
as your? I don't know. I need to
You don't wanna
understand
get
that more.
All right.
Okay, that's
There's your
fine.
answer. So that's why
Okay.
people do it.
So there is potentially some financial advantage to not renting all of a property, but it's not clear to me that there's anything like that could be done in the charter to address that.
The only thing that I know that we talked about with the property folks is that an attempt to maybe offset that positive gain for people by increasing the local property tax. That's what we talked about. I don't know if that's
Or fees.
or fees or something that
Associated
would
with a
that would
registry.
make it less,
With the registry.
at least less desirable to you continue to use it as a write-off. I don't know if you'll ever get to that. It's hard to decide where that point is. Where that's very difficult to administer, et cetera. We've talked about that, but it's worth having a conversation with Meryl about, because I know I've talked to her about it in the past. Be interested to see what our current thinking is about it.
Uh-huh. So maybe like strategies to offset financial incentives associated with vacant properties.
Yeah, to undermine the present financial incentives associated with vacant properties.
Do you know offhand, are the incentives to write off greater than renting it
Sometimes.
sometimes?
Yeah. I mean, for instance, if you want to, you're not occupying the property and you want to set up a computer office, all that stuff is deductible.
Right.
You could, yes, the
Okay.
answer to your question is yes.
I mean, I'd love to talk to you where the three of us could talk and not be a quorum or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there beer involved?
Yeah, we could.
It's a great question. All right.
That insight.
Other topics for properties. All right. I have two things here just that have come up a couple times that I just, if Mel's going to be here anyway, and for the purpose of due diligence, I'd love to just hear her direct response to these. That we've heard on a number of topics that would require legislative change. The charter is state statute enacted by the legislature. I'm still not clear that those are like two separate things.
So I can just opine on that a little bit.
Sure.
Because I've talked to Meryl before about these things, and I want her to give her perspective too. But I think the difference is that the charter applies to one town.
Mm-hmm.
So this legislature is very. If there's something that applies to all towns,
Mhm.
and you're in Bennington or some other town is asking for something unique to them, the legislature is often like, well, that really shouldn't be unique to Bennington. That should be a statewide
Oh, yeah.
thing.
Okay.
So we're not going to approve that for Bennington. We might approve it for everybody. Probably not, but they might.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we mean when we say that's probably going to require legislative change, because the legislature is probably not going to do that just for one town.
I got you.
So, but that's probably what we're getting. But we can certainly talk to Meryl. She'll be able to articulate much better than I can. But that's always how I think about it.
Okay, that's
My
helpful.
understanding
Thank you.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second one, resultant of one of our public comments, just about elected officials swearing oaths to the U.S. Constitution. We've heard again that this is just would require legislative change. That is, but just if she's going to be here anyway, it'd be great to just hear that from her. Any other things for Great. All right, I will update this with the couple of additions that we've made, and the striking of vacant from one of those properties questions, and get those off to our liaisons in the next day or so.
Yeah, because we'll want to check, hopefully we can get Meryl here next week, but if not, the week after, because
Yeah.
we're running out of time or so.
Yeah. So we'll see if that hits next week's agenda.
That's great.
And that'll take a lot of time, right?
That's probably that
That'll be
whole
like the whole
meeting,
meeting, right?
Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
instinct. Yeah. All right. Next agenda item: prep for select board meeting. So we are meeting with the select board again. I think it's October 28th, which is
Monday.
A week from
No,
Monday.
A week from Monday.
A week from Monday.
Oh yeah, Halloween.
So we'll have one more meeting between now and then.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
One more meeting. But if Meryl's here, we won't be talking about much, we won't be able to focus on that too much, probably,
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Let's just go to 9.
I guess my instinct is to just give a similar update. Of course, we'll talk about Jim's passing probably briefly, how that's impacted our work. I mentioned our next public forum. It'd be a good opportunity to advertise that a little more. Do we think that it's appropriate to share with the select board some of the more substantive conversations we've had around governance and potentially Seaport today and voting? I think we're getting a little closer on some of those things. Or just leave it still very much.
It might be helpful, not necessarily to the select board, but to those people watching, if you have in fact have some positions that are relatively concrete, you can just lay them out there. You don't have to get into a big explanation, but it might be helpful for the people at home that are, wondering what this group is doing.
Yeah.
It just might be helpful. And here's a question that just occurred to me. And we are now a 6-member body.
Mm-hmm.
Is it appropriate, or do we have enough time to ask the select board to appoint another party?
I thought about that myself. I think one of the challenges that could come up around that is when we get into actually voting on a number of things, we potentially could wind up in a situation where we have a tie vote, which is usually why these types of committees have an odd number of members. So that could be one challenging piece of staying with 6. On the other hand, I think given the work that we've done already, it might delay us further to try to bring an additional person up to speed.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly happy to have a conversation about this, because I'm not strong one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree with you on having to bring somebody up to speed. I think that if we look at, I think this group can do it without having a 7th member. That's just my opinion, just based on the general consensus and camaraderie that we seem to have, except when I thought. But but it's but in all seriousness, it's I think we can do it. I think if we reconfigure some committees,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
maybe I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, but eliminate the miscellaneous committee, absorb that into something else. I mean, something like that. I don't know.
Rebecca's
Are
going to
you
be
joining
crushed.
Yeah. Well,
properties or?
it was on my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I was
just
gonna
doing it that
bring
way.
that up.
I think the group can do it, though.
Mhm.
At this point, I mean, we're more than halfway through. I think it's, by the time that process, I don't know. I don't know how effective it would be at this point.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Like, what is the? Let's say it was 3 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
What there was just no getting around it. What is the process for?
There's no action taken.
But they could just put that on the report that these were a 3-3 vote and leave it up to the select board about whether or not they want to.
That's what I'm getting.
It's not
Yeah.
like,
So it could still
That's
go to
fair.
the select
Right,
board, right?
right.
It still
It would
goes
be in
to
the-
them.
It just wouldn't
in the
be, it just
report.
wouldn't be a formal action by
Yeah.
the committee. You
Yeah.
could note that you couldn't come to conclusion.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then it's basically giving them the opportunity to decide whether, which they have the opportunity to do on anything basically, but
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
they can be that
That's what I was
quote
wondering.
7th vote, I guess.
I mean, we could, I mean, I don't think this is likely, but we could make no recommendations and they could still put
Yeah.
things to the voters on
Absolutely.
a ballot. Yeah.
Yeah, right up to, and it could be completely unrelated to anything that was talked about.
And the inverse is true. We could
Yeah.
make a whole bunch of recommendations and they put none of them.
Yeah,
Right.
There you go.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then it doesn't even stop there. That's I feel very comfortable with us being even because there's so many.
Is there
more
any legal
gates.
component to us staying at 6
No.
versus 7? So
I just,
Wrestle.
a board member may ask the question
Right, no,
while
that's
you're giving
good.
your presentation.
Does that affect, well, I guess quorum is still a majority of members, right?
Right.
And so it would still be 4.
It's still before.
yeah.
Okay.
It
Yes.
doesn't change that.
do we need to vote on staying at 6? Should we vote or does
Not your
it?
decision.
Does it?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we could ask to have an additional member appointed, but
I think if you make it clear that the committee has discussed it and you're
Okay.
very happy
Comfortable
with
moving
what you have
forward, yeah.
and where you are, that would be enough.
I'm fine with it.
yeah, I am.
Same.
Okay.
Same.
I just thought I had to raise it.
No, thank
No,
you,
that was
Stu.
good.
I was gonna bring that up under the subcommittee section and also sort of this idea about potentially giving a little extra manpower to some of the committees that are short a person now. But let's stay on select board meeting prep and then we'll get to that in a minute. Any other thoughts about select board prep? Things that folks feel are important for me to mention, or?
I think that it's important to mention everything you mentioned at the first meeting.
Mhm.
It's a different crowd that may be there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it's the same group that'll be making comments
Mhm.
at that point. So I think that even if we've gotten no further on some of the decisions or finalizing some of them, I think just rehashing where we are is beneficial.
And I think it might be helpful to, in addition to sharing some recommendations that we're, let's say hashing out the details on that we think we're likely to recommend or we're working out the details on. I think we can also say like, there's some specific things here that we've decided like do not have support on our committee. We could share those things, I think.
I think to Stu's point as well, like when we're talking about things that we're considering, even though we're addressing the select board, we're still exclusively talking to the people of the town of Bennington. So the select board just happens to be there as like they're the board, so we can share, you know, kind of freely what what we think is, give them that idea of, you know, what Stu pointed out. This is what we're working on. Here's what we've considered. Here's what we're not considering.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you handled it last time was great. And then we'll see, you know, the reactions from the select board. We'll see what they are.
Yeah. Great. And then I think this time we'll have materials, posters, things like that for the forum. So that would be a good opportunity to hand some of those things out.
Mm-hmm.
Little unrelated select board meeting, but you know, I if there's a way that we can do a better job advertising the second forum, I think that would be good too.
So are we gonna make an effort to put these folks up at the beginning of the meeting?
Well, as you know, Dan, I will be traveling on the 22nd.
Oh, I did not know.
With the board, so, I mean, I think that would be the idea. This is gonna be a presentation, so it probably
Yeah.
should go first.
Yeah.
I don't know what else we're bringing forward on the 28th.
Well, no.
I know it may be been high, but
No,
no, you don't think
it
we'll
won't
be
be.
ready?
It won't be ready.
Okay.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what else is there.
Okay.
The minutes could take.
And then this could take a little time.
If Ben High's on the agenda, I would love to go first.
Thank you,
It won't. It will not formally be on the agenda. Somebody may talk about it in public comment or whatever, but it won't. It won't be a presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Anything else about the select board meetings? Great. We'll move on to subcommittee reports. Before we dig into specific groups, like I mentioned, there are now 2 groups, properties and governance, that are short a member. I don't know how those groups feel about the workload that remains, and if they can cover that. Potentially there's someone else on this committee that might have some extra capacity that would be willing to lend a hand there. I'd be happy to hear thoughts on both of those.
I don't want to mention any names, Rebecca. But no, actually, I mean, I can only speak really for. I mean, Rebecca does a great job for miscellaneous and things, but depending on what Merrill says, the governance committee may not be recommending anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now we went from 3 things to 1, which is the employment agreement. Everything else, like the term limits and everything else have been, and the national search and things like that have been kind of tabled. So it's real. So if we find out from Merrill that the select board can offer an employment contract on their own, they don't need something, then, maybe minimal effort, but to have another resource would be helpful anyway.
Okay.
For committees, for properties, I mean, you obviously can disagree, but I think there's still some learning and things before us pertaining to the charter, and more things outside of the charter that we want to be sure to cite and make recommendations about as part of our report. And I've heard from a bunch of people, like, even if it can't be a charter, like, tell us what to, like inviting that information. And I think that work will take some time. So just naming that, I don't know if you feel like you and I can, like,
Is that
do that
something to what you had mentioned, Dan, where as long as we provide the general idea, that's something that the people who write this will be able to take care of versus us doing it? Or what is that? Do we need to cite the...
Like, I think that, we have a lot of, things before us that are like Montpelier things and ordinance things, and I'd love for in the report, since we have done so much research, to say we're recommending the charter change in these ways, and let it be noted that in these other spaces, we would, if we had the power, we would, recommend the following, and be the more specific, the better. We would recommend a 30% increase to the board budget, the town budget in the properties work. We would want the minimums for courts on whatever, vacant, blah, 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 to go from $100 a day to something higher than that. I see opportunity there for us to contribute to that broader discussion.
I think if we have that discussion with Merrill, we'll ask those questions, then maybe that's something,
Okay.
I'm happy to...
Okay, I just think it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah,
So.
do you feel like you'd benefit from sort of an extra set of hands to do that work?
I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, I'm not opposed either. Just want to name that. It might take some hours. And again, I think the more specific and articulate we are in that, the better. But it will definitely involve, like, Googling and real writing. So, anyway.
Well, one thing I was going to just offer was that, I kind of had early on volunteered as part of being on the admin committee, kind of organizing the report and doing a lot of the writing for the report. So some of this also sounds like it could naturally fit into what I was going to be doing anyway, and just, you know, extending that maybe a little bit further than I would have normally, just to kind of help with that kind of, you know, even with Drew, with what you were talking about, things like that. So I feel
Cool.
like I have the capacity to take that on if people would need that help.
Join us then for that sense and any other way. Yeah.
Okay.
If that's okay with you, Joe.
Yeah. That's
Cool.
great.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, that's great.
Well, since we've opened the door on this, any other sort of rejiggering of committees?
So Jim was not on the CPARB committee?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, great. I think we can follow similar to how we did last week. If there's new information that one of the committees has to bring to us, I'm happy to hear that. Admin? Nothing? Right. Governance? Properties? Voting?
John Odom from Montpelier did get back to me after missing the meeting today.
Oh, okay.
He was busy with election stuff, which is totally understandable.
Right.
So we're tentatively trying to reschedule for Monday. Haven't gotten a time yet, but I'll set it up. I'll send you guys a Zoom link.
Cool.
You know, it'll be one of those like,
If you can make it, yeah.
yeah, if we can make it, great. I'll ask him if he wants to have it recorded to share with you guys if we're not all there. If
That'd
not,
be great. Yeah.
If not, whatever. I have talked to a lot of people about the non-citizen and underage voting that are just in the circle of who I come in contact with, and it's been an interesting response. I would say that there's a learning curve with perceptions. I think is kind of one of the biggest hurdles to it. So presenting the facts of defining what is a resident, and those are all things that are going to be very important in any decision or recommendation that's made, because a lot of people at first have one opinion based on misinformed definition. And then once they realize, oh, they're allowed to be here legally, or oh, they're a legal resident, then that's when the conversation changes a little bit. So
Okay. Yeah.
that's all I have to add to the voting component.
Okay. Thank you. Miscellaneous?
Yeah, I have a whole bunch. Just kidding. Nothing.
Great. Thank you. Our sort of extended conversation today, we're almost right on time. It's amazing. Is on potential changes to increase the autonomy of the CPAR board. I have included a handout for you. It's a little lengthy just because so the first kind of 3 pages are sort of my synopsis of sort of this legislative landscape. Page 4, changes to consider, or just some specific charter changes that we might want to discuss related to this. What follows are just the full text of what I've sort of summarized on the first 3 pages. A bill that's currently sitting in the state legislature, as well as 2 opinions related to that proposed legislation. So you may or may not remember when we during our first meeting or two, I put together a short packet of various charter provisions from around the state, some other legislative pieces that sort of were relevant to the work that we've been doing. One of those was this S.75 bill that was proposed by Senator Sears and Campion. Senator Sears and Campion, if anyone doesn't know, are Bennington County's two state senators currently, having somewhat currently. Senator Sears passed away a couple months ago, and I believe they have declined to appoint a replacement close to the election. Senator Campion is not seeking re-election, so both of these senators will no longer be serving in another week, I think. The election coming up will determine who our state senators will be going forward. So against that backdrop, this legislation is unlikely to see much movement in the legislature with both of the sponsors gone. This proposed legislation specifically would grant municipalities the authority to create civilian oversight boards, and grants or authorizes the select board to delegate authority to that oversight board. Many of the authorities that we've sort of heard sort of tossed around and discussed in relation to the work that CPORB has been doing. I believe this legislation was introduced shortly after the resolution creating the CPORB board in Bennington. And when I look at the resolution for the Community Policing Advisory Review Board and the goals that were laid out in that resolution, and then I look at this proposed legislation, it looks like they were almost written by the same person, like they support each other, almost verbatim, right? So it does seem like this was designed specifically for our CPORB board. When I spoke with the NAACP, they directed me to a letter that they co-authored with the ACLU, and I've put some selections from that letter here. They came out in support of this proposed legislation. The letter that they wrote specifically calls for both says, for that reason, we write to urge the Select Board to formally seek that authority from the General Assembly, both in the form of a charter amendment and as a broader statutory change. So this proposed legislation is that broader statutory change. What we'd be discussing is that charter amendment. Following that is testimony offered by VLCT, Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, and their opinion on this legislation, that it sort of overrides some processes already in place at the state level, some regional Vermont Criminal Justice Council efforts that basically have the same authority that this legislation is seeking to grant to citizen oversight boards. So there's one of the things that I sort of found interesting in going back to this and sort of looking at it again with the perspective that we've gained from speaking with members of CPORB and the Bennington Police Department is that I I guess I was sort of starting to feel like it was completely unreasonable to request some of these authorities be granted to like a local board like this. But then when I see potential legislation introduced by Senator Sears and Campion, two very well-respected senators, it makes me feel like, you know, it's not completely unreasonable to be considering these changes, right? So I'm happy to have a bit of a broader discussion about sort of this legislative landscape, but then I sort of cherry-picked a couple pieces of like what's in that S.75 bill, and we put together sort of some pros and cons of each of those things to hoping to sort of have a generative discussion here today.
What did your stakeholders when the police and the CPAR board members have to say about S75? They have any specific reflections?
I don't recall either of them mentioning this legislation. I don't think we asked specifically.
Interesting. And have you met with Campion yet?
No.
Okay.
It's a good thought.
At least he's around. He's not running for anything, so although he's probably still busy, but that'd be good
He's
to
a
talk to
full-time
him.
student.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, it seems like he's a good person to talk to too. But I'm surprised it didn't come up in discussion since it's so recent and relevant.
Yeah, one thing Jackie and I were talking about was we had found this early on, but because we were getting, jumping in head first, I
Sure.
think we kind of knew that it was there, didn't focus on that versus getting the opinions of everybody.
Sure.
And now we're kind of revisiting the legislative component to it. The one thing that I was going to say that we didn't really talk about was, so I've been pretty, vocal about my opinion regarding the efficiency and effectiveness of CPAR board itself. But diving back into the legislative component of it, I don't think that I've really gotten too deep into the select board's role in the oversight of the board itself, right? Like they have the ability, if they wanted to remove every single member of CPAR.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So I think that in terms of when I talk about effectiveness and efficiency, the select board is the oversight for CPARB. So if CPARB is not being effective or efficient, it's the duty of the select board to address that. So when I talk about things like I haven't seen a report in 2 years, it shouldn't fall on our committee to know that. The select board, in my opinion, I guess what I want to find out is, have they reached out to that board and asked, what are the issues you're facing? Why do we not have a report? What can we do to help expedite a report? So I think perhaps, and I don't know how we do this, but getting those answers from the select board, if we're able to do that. I don't know if it's appropriate for us to be communicating about that.
We could maybe meet with Jean Connor, the select board liaison, to.
And I know the board is different, right?
Mhm.
It's different than the board that was responsible for this.
Yeah.
So at least a few members.
Who appointed the board of CPAR? Who appoints them?
The select board.
So would it be beneficial to either or have one seat on the select board as a member of CPAR?
They have a liaison.
Well, they have a
liaison.
liaison similar to how we have a liaison from municipal government. Yeah.
Or somebody from the select board sit on their board?
That's a little different than a liaison, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the liaison is like a non-voting member, right? Is there to sort of guide CPARB through sort of Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct an open meeting, if they have any requests for the select board to facilitate that kind of conversation, but is, I think, not supposed to be directing the work of the CPOR board.
Who of the select board, like, I guess, do we know what is the communication between CPARB and the select board in regards to, like, achieving the goals, communicating that,
I
just
guess that's
overall
where I'm going.
Yeah, maybe it needs to be elevated from liaison
I mean,
to.
I'm trying not to make another branch of government
Sure.
to provide oversight to them, but if there was some engagement of a member of this select committee, it would be more, I think that it would force that this would be a regular topic.
Just to be
they
clear,
do-
the liaison is a select board member. There is a
Right.
select board member that goes to
Right.
is charged with going with to every CPAR meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Currently.
So is it then fair to assume, and I know the saying about that, but is it fair to assume that the select board is aware that there have been no reports produced? They are aware of the issues that have been going on, and then my follow-up question to that is, what has the select board done to help CPARB? And the follow-up question to that is, what has the select board done to improve their ability in terms of holding the police department accountable, because that is also part of their duty per our charter?
What? First, I want to be a little careful first, right? That I think the language around like CPOB holding the police department accountable is potentially loaded, right? And I think ideally CPOB would be sort of in more of a collegial relationship with the police department, a partner with the police department to offer an outside perspective and to help inform policies and stuff. There's the review of complaints component of it that maybe has some accountability, but one of the things that has frustrated me a little in a lot of the conversations that I've had is this feeling that people think that a CPOR board has to be either like a pet project of the police department or like really antagonistic towards the police department, and I don't think either of those things are true. I think there's a real collaborative relationship that can happen there.
Do you think that they can still have that collaborative relationship by both being antagonistic when it's required and being partnered in community events when that's required versus one or nothing?
Yeah, I think at different times the tone might swing a little one way or the other. But I think a lot of the concern that I've heard from members of CPOB in the community and stuff is that there's a concern that relationship will become mostly combative, you know, and there's, I think that's a lot of the pushback we've gotten towards this board having any teeth, so to speak, right? Is that, you know, if they can compel, information or insist on something happening, then that's going to be abused and it's going to push the police department around. And so I just want to be careful about the language that we're using and how we're approaching this to sort of walk that fine line.
I think that's an important reminder, but I also feel like to hold someone accountable is what we should all strive for. Like, I'm accountable to my boss. She is my biggest advocate. She's my champion, and she lets me know when I mess up and keeps me in line with my job description. So I also just want to say that I think accountability for all of us in each of our roles is not an adversarial or problematic something to strive for or to practice.
I think that unfortunately Jackie's correct that accountability is used is
Right.
used in a negative way, and people that typically use that word often use it as a way to punish people as opposed to keep them on track or help them be on track.
Yeah.
So I think that's what when she says it's loaded, it can be very loaded. So you have to be careful about how people perceive that word.
Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
that's valid.
But accountability in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's
Right.
how you intend to make somebody accountable. You know, it's like I'm going to punish them because they screwed up, as opposed to we're going to make the situation better and figure out what the problem is so it's solved. So I think that's where I have a high sensitivity to that word, and I also think, and we haven't talked about it much in here, but there is a large portion of this community that feels like the police is not treated fairly, and that CPAR is not an appropriate thing to have. I'm not saying that I agree with that, but it's a very large portion of this population that supports the police and sees efforts to increase oversight, accountability, whatever you want to call it, as negative, and could affect recruiting. We already have difficulty recruiting police officers. I think there's that whole sentiment is out there, which is why Jackie's being very careful to say let's make sure we don't inflame the situation.
Sure.
And so that's
And also, there's a lot of people in town who feel that the police and their roles have been privileged, and particular members have been, marginalized and abused and racially profiled, which is manifested in multiple lawsuits that are ongoing. So it's both and everything in the middle.
Yes, absolutely. I'll share one of what kind of really irks me about the current state of things, right, is that the Citizen Police Advisory Review Board was given a set of goals to accomplish, and then they were not given the tools needed to accomplish those goals, right? And so in our effort here to improve the operation of town government, I look at that and I say, this is what they're supposed to be doing, right? This resolution is what they're supposed to be doing, but they're not allowed to do that. I have so much sympathy for the members of that board. Imagine being appointed to a board, showing up, going through 30 some odd hours of training as an unpaid volunteer, right? And then sitting down and being told, okay, go. And you go, okay, well, let's do this one first. No, you can't do that. Well, why not? Well, legally you're not allowed to do that. Oh, okay. Let's do this one. No, you can't do that either. Like, no wonder they feel like, what are we supposed to be doing? Like, what's our role here, And I think against the backdrop of the situation that this board has been placed in, I think they've done a really great job at finding ways that they can contribute positively, right? But for me, like, it's really frustrating to see these goals and then no ability to execute on these goals. And so in considering this, it's either give them the tools that they need to do this work,
right,
or decide that they should be doing different work.
And to what extent have you guys or those members identified those tools and asked for them?
I think that was one of the things I pointed out in our previous discussion is I think my opinion, my perspective was that there wasn't enough initiative taken to do that. But now that we've gone back to look at the legislative component, I'm also questioning, to Jackie's point that she just made, was what has the select board done to help give them the tools or make the we know that the tools have not been provided, so what adjustments to the goals? Like as you go through a budget, any sort of projection, you don't hit it, okay, here's what we need to do to get this. You're always trying to fix it, right? You don't just go, oh, well, we don't have the tools and we're not going to hit our projections. But that's, if I'm being honest, my observation over the last 2 years is that's kind of how it's been. We're not going to provide them with the tools. Here was the goals, and we're never going to hit the goals. And nothing has been done, whether you could say initiative or whatever. There's still a select board component to this that in my perfect ideal, governmental body world that doesn't exist, the select board would have sat down with them and said, okay, we're at the 6-month mark. Here's your struggles, great. At a year, nothing's transpired. Our struggles are still the same because that's what the board communicated to us and that's what the chief communicated to us. So then at that point, it should have been like, okay, well, we either have to adjust the tools, which hasn't been done, or we got to adjust the goals because you can't reach the goals without those tools. And I haven't seen any adjustment in the goals, correct me if I'm wrong, and I haven't seen any adjustment in the tools. And that's where that has me at the point where it's just like, I don't know what to do regarding CPARB and the charter itself. However, as we're seeing with this statute, the statute points out another method of, empowerment to that kind of board that could potentially strengthen their ability to not rely so heavily on.
Isn't there a way without approaching, that organization and the charter and the select committee, is just have certain times of year that they have to report out on certain goals?
Yeah, that's been a
assigned to
consideration.
them.
Yeah.
Like at the quarterly meeting and such, you're going to present, citizen I don't know, whatever in other words, whatever their goals are, you have dates they have to report out on those goals. And then it would be the select committee's responsibility to make sure they have the tools that they have in order to make that presentation to the select committee.
So what I would say to that is, and this is what I'm trying to articulate, is I would have thought the select board would have already had that in place over the last 2 years for them. And then we're also trying to be careful not to dictate how the board manages itself as well. We'd like them to, do that from within, but it hasn't happened. And that's the catch-22 for me, is it hasn't happened. I haven't seen that accountability along the way. And I know, accountability, and I get, and all well taken. Just happens to be a word I use often.
There's a difference between, to me, there's a difference between accountability and public oversight. To see that this quasi-organization that was formed is doing what they're supposed to do.
Well, in the corporate world, right? If you have people who are not being effective, and you have something that true in some cases, they're removed, they're gone, they're fired. Now I'm not calling for anybody to be fired, but I'm just saying over the course of 2 years, when we talk about what tools have been provided, the answer is none, to my knowledge. We've made no adjustments to the goals, to my knowledge. We've made no changes to the boards itself versus beyond just the normal turnover. So I'm not seeing anything from a leadership oversight standpoint, I'm going to use the word again, that provides the accountability that I would want as a citizen for a topic that obviously came to light because of a demand and outcry for that said oversight.
I will share, and then we're gonna, that I attended last night's Seaport meeting. One of the topics on their agenda was an effort that they've had underway to sort of rewrite their resolution, their goals, and to bring that to the select board and recommend that the select board change their goals in certain ways, right? What I heard was a great departure from this set of goals, and while I think it's certainly prudent for us to take that into consideration, that there is an effort underway to redefine the goals of this board, it's unclear to me if the select board how the select board is going to receive the CPARB's recommendations on what their new goals should be, or if the select board still thinks that these are the appropriate goals for CPARB. So until that gets a little further, which I don't think it will by the time we wrap up our process, I feel like I still have to orient myself around these are the goals of CPORB.
Can I ask you a question in regards to the meeting? What was there anything specific on the goals that are laid out that they wanted changed that you're able to articulate to us?
Of like the 7 goals here, I think they basically eliminated 5 of them and added 5 new ones, and 1 or 2 of them remain the same. I think promote learning on community safety and equity issues was unchanged. Please don't quote me on this.
Yeah, no, I'm just.
And then I think the recommendations on community collaboration efforts was largely unchanged. But a lot of these other ones were reimagined to be more supportive of existing police department efforts, and less less advisory or review oriented.
Interesting.
Rebecca.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm backing up a little bit, but just so I'm more clear on this, I hear a lot of talk about these tools. I don't know what the tools are specifically. I'm sure there's lots of different ones, right, that we're talking about. But are they things that are being held up because of state laws, local laws, money? I mean, are they things that could be addressed and changed, or are they things that are completely outside of the jurisdiction of the select board or us, or or the charter or any of that? I'm not really sure what we're talking about when we say they don't have the tools to do it. Is it something that can be fixed, the tools part, or is it really that it does need to go through the change in the resolution because you're never going to get these tools? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not really sure I understand.
Sure. So I mean, just because I put this together, I'll read a few selections that I think kind of get to those questions. I understand that these were not provided ahead of time to any of you. So when I say tools, right, to meet these goals, the proposed legislation, for example, would allow a legislative body to delegate the authority to a civilian oversight board to receive, investigate, and address all grievances, contract with or hire an attorney, contract with or hire investigators, inspect and examine all law enforcement agency records and documents, and administer oaths and issue subpoenas to compel the attendance or testimony of a witness or the production of any relevant evidence. So when we look at like review complaints, last night at the CPORB meeting, there were 3 complaints that were presented at that meeting. I don't know if they're calling what happened last night a review. I don't know that I would characterize it that way. What I witnessed was the police chief presenting the complaint in an anonymized fashion, explaining this was the complaint. We investigated. We determined that the officer followed protocol. The officer was exonerated. There were a few questions, on the complaint from members of the board, but nothing really probing. There was no action taken to, approve or agree with the police department's outcome there. So out of 3 complaints that were presented by the chief, 3 officers were exonerated and 1 went through a disciplinary procedure. But apart from maybe 3 or 4 questions that members of CPORB asked the police chief, I didn't see anything that was really probing into the facts of the case. It wasn't clear to me that they had the facts of the case in front of them. There was a question that was asked of the police chief if the police chief reviewed body cam footage, for example, but I don't believe members of CPORB had access to that body cam footage, for example, right? And so,
And they wouldn't at this point because it would help identify the personnel involved.
yeah, fair.
Right. That's what I was just going to ask, is if it's possible for them to have, but it wouldn't have been.
I think
Under
what,
the current way it's set up, the select board did not envision them actually being, in a sense, an investigative body.
Right. And in regards to your question about the tool sets, so in a circumstance like that, this would be something that I would expect the board to bring up and say, look, in order for us to better be able to review, we would need the ability to review body camera footage. We would need the ability to review a report prior to maybe speaking with the police chief so that they can come to review it amongst themselves and then have a separate conversation with the police department versus, and there's that disconnection that the community wants that independent component to it, and then there's the conjunction working partnership with the police department, which is, okay, we've reviewed this, you've reviewed it, let's sit down and discuss versus just
Or even hire someone to do that.
or hire
on
it,
your behalf.
correct,
Right.
which
and
goes
then
in
I
the
think
budget.
which speaks to your point, part of the ACLU's letter here. We understand that CPOB's limited powers due at least in part to the select board's interpretation of Vermont law, it's constraining the ability of local cities and towns to delegate or authorize civilian review of police complaints. Although we believe Vermont law allows that to go further than the select board to go further than they did in delegating authority, we agree Bennington likely needs additional statutory authorization to create the kind of civilian oversight model necessary to deliver constitutional policing. And so then this legislative bill here does that in effect, but it does that on the state level so that all municipalities in Vermont would have the ability to create an oversight board with the authority to, well, as I've previously mentioned.
Right, and just to make sure that I'm getting it, so in your example, if they had said, though in that meeting, oh, we need to see these things, they really,
They're not entitled to it currently.
right, okay, so they, I mean, it's not for lack of them asking, or I mean, even if they don't ask, but
They
even if
didn't
they
ask.
did ask, they wouldn't be able to get it, right?
Well, it would have been at the discretion of the police
Right.
department.
When-
Oh, would have been, or is
Right.
it not allowed?
Well,
I mean,
the police
what I'm trying to
department would
figure out,
not,
if somebody's-
would not have done it.
Right.
It would not have allowed it.
But, and then I
Because
think,
we don't release personnel information to
Is that a
citizen-
policy, or is that a, like?
That is what we
Oh,
do.
It's under the contract.
law?
but it's a union thing.
Yeah, there is a,
so it's
yeah.
law.
And it's based in law, but it's a difficult situation. I mean, if you're going to create an organization that has that power, and they are created
Yeah,
throughout the United States, there aren't that many of them. I think there were 200 at last count for all the police departments in the United States. But some of them, Cambridge, Mass, they have investigative authority. They have attorneys on staff. They are able to get in and see that stuff. But that would take an action or a decision by the select board, and perhaps a statute that allows it beyond, because there is this issue of violating the individual's rights at the same time. So right now, they don't have that. I don't think the law, the ACLU may think it's there. I don't think many people do think it's there.
gotcha.
And I think to your point on a separate topic earlier about, like, unless some of these things are, like, required by law, like, they're likely to just get overlooked or not happen, right? So, for example, a request of the police chief for some anonymized data or something like that. I mean, the police are really overworked right now. You know, they're understaffed and everything. And I can completely understand that if that comes through as a request, but they're not mandated to respond to that or whatever, like, maybe it just falls through the cracks. It doesn't happen. It's not on the priority list because it doesn't have to happen, you know? It's sort of at his discretion, and so then it just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying he's received a request, but I just...
I hear you.
Okay.
Right.
And again, all complaints go to the police first, or is there ever a moment where there is some sort of grievance that goes to CPARB first and then the police? It's only the flow.
They mentioned that
Even a
last.
complaint sent to CPAR would be forwarded to the chief of police to investigate.
They mentioned that last night that Kelly, the chair, mentioned receiving some concerns or criticisms or complaints, and when she receives those, presumably in her town email or otherwise, her response is, here's a link to the form on the town website where you can submit this complaint to the police.
And does CPARP have an opinion about that flow and process?
The only thing I remember hearing from them is we're not allowed to receive complaints like that.
Interesting. Because I find that problematic in terms of, I mean, like, for obvious reasons. So, and it seems like something that could be easily fixed. Like a transparent, it comes to both of us type of thing, or, in terms of gatekeeping, fear of retaliation by the police.
Again, personnel issues,
But could CPAR submit something on behalf of somebody else?
Yes.
Yes,
They-
right?
they-
So they could take a
Right,
complaint
yeah,
and put and fill out the form on behalf of somebody else.
In theory.
I mean, how did the police then investigate that complaint without
I'm just
knowing?
I'm just
who-
thinking this through, right?
I
Like,
think what
Makes no
you're pointing
sense,
out
though.
to is like it's the initiative to take ownership is probably the wrong word, but like that whatever that initiative is through their organization, through their board, and that's kind of what I've touched on before, which is I would love to see that instance where it's like, look, we don't have the all complaints go to the police chief, but is there that dialogue with that board to complaints that come to them where they, even before they submit something to the police chief themselves, they've already kind of viewed it prior
right,
to
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's where just me as a citizen, like looking at it through the lens of the purpose of that board and the reason it was brought to the town, I would expect the connection to the police department for the review. And when I don't see that, that's something that I feel should be addressed and could be very well addressed through that legislation. And then it comes back to our role, what the charter is. So how, like, given the fact that Mr. Sears is since deceased, I don't remember, Campion is not running for re-election, I think it's safe to say that bill potentially is dead in the water or not going to go through. I don't know, that could be a wrong assumption. But how do we, and or do we, strengthen that in the town? What does that look like? More questions for Merrill.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to.
And I think for me, like, I keep coming back to like, what's really the problem here? Like, leave aside like what CPORB should be, what they shouldn't be, what they should or shouldn't do, right? People are entitled to all of their opinions on that, but what's the problem is we have a board that has a set of goals that they're unable to execute on. That doesn't seem like a very operative government body to me, right? And so either give them the what they need to execute on those goals, or change their goals.
And it sounds like, since yesterday, it sounds like they're trying to change the goals, soften them, potentially, scale them back in a way that aligns with current police efforts, which makes sense if you want to match those things up, but to me, and my interpretation of the intent and the impetus for creating such an organization is deviates from that original vision.
Yeah.
I think it only strengthens our ability to attract officers and the overview of our police department if we have an organized method of this kind of board operating in partnership and on an accountability side, to where anybody who works in that department, anybody who's part of this town, can feel security and the clarity and the transparency and the efforts that are made at the town level, all across the board. So, like, that's what I'm trying to get to here is
Yeah, I think one of the things that came out of our group was potentially like a valuable recommendation in our report is to present those two options to the select board. Say, look, we think you should either find a way to grant this board the authority through this charter change, or re-envision what this board should be, right? And just say what's untenable to us is that this situation remains unresolved, right?
I have to run, but
You could do that through simply your report. If you're not recommending a charter change, you could be very strong in your report, recommending a change or a more aggressive stance on meeting the goals that are outlined.
Right. Well, I almost imagine like option A, this charter change, or option
The
B.
charter, and the charter change would be giving them the tools. That would be on the tools side, right? So you're saying, right.
And I imagine it might be very similar to this legislation, just the language adapted to be appropriate for like a town charter. Or option B, don't do that and instead reimagine what this board is.
Yeah, because having them spin their wheels,
yeah.
it's just,
And I would just add the
Frustrating.
caveat that like the tools, again, I don't know, but like there's a lot of them that probably range from what we would consider extreme to I would consider extremely basic, and just like appreciating that nuance that, you know, there's a lot of them. You're not necessarily saying all of the ones that have ever come up, but something more, you know, measured and thoughtful about each single tool, and whether it's them as a committee of community members doing it, or I think contracting out professionals and empowering them to hire, you know, the way that you have mediators, like you have mediators that come in, or consultants, like to do that on their behalf. To me, I find.
well, and that comes down to budget.
Right,
And
it's
that
a
comes
budget.
back to my point, which is in order to justify a budget to taxpayers, we want, you know, speaking for myself, I would want to know, okay, you've all done your due diligence to show us this is what's needed versus just trust us, this is what's needed, which is where I feel like I find us at right now.
That's tough.
Yeah. So,
I would just point out, there is an organization that does oversee the police department statewide. That's the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. And so if there's a complaint against an officer for certain conduct that rises to a certain level, it has to be reported mandatorily to them. So that one solution might be to broaden the scope of that professional body that's fully funded and has staff, et cetera, as opposed to trying to have every little town in the state try to do that function, because that's an incredibly expensive function. Because if you're talking about personnel and employee rights, constitutional rights, you have to have attorneys involved, you have to have professional investigators, you have to have people that can keep confidential information confidential, you have to make sure that the people don't have conflicts of interest. It's an incredibly expensive endeavor, and if we could either make it regionalized or statewide, that's a much more cost-effective way, because it's not like we get, I know that people think that we get hundreds of complaints, but we don't. And so if you were to get them, do it maybe countywide or bi-countywide, then you could have one body that could do it professionally, and everybody would have comfort that those folks are trained and they know how to do it, et cetera. So that's why I have real discomfort, and I'm sorry, I'm not a member of the committee and I shouldn't speak up, but I have real discomfort with every single town trying to do this. Not the working with the police, not the oversight of policy, but trying to do personnel management or personnel. That's an incredibly fraught issue.
sure.
And I think too, I assume, and you guys know best, that the work of CPARP isn't limited to complaint as individual things, but instead education, communication, things that
Policy
don't even,
development.
Don't even have to do it with
that
individuals.
I feel actually we haven't talked about as much, so maybe we can do that sometime.
Right, agreed.
And
We should get together again next week.
VLCT's letter does address the VCJC and their role in this, and so I provided
Yeah, no,
you
it was
those.
very-
Yeah, I just
It's
didn't
very
want us, I
balanced.
remind us
Yes,
not
we
to
didn't
get
talk about
too
it.
No,
complaint centric
So-
with all that we're discussing.
Actually, I like
It's a lot
that.
more.
So I, I'd encourage you to sort of read through and be familiar with that. It sounds like we're going to be revisiting this topic at this point. So any but you know, I think we did a good job like understanding like the current dynamic up till now, and so I wanted to make sure like we had like a thorough discussion of like the legislative landscape and like potential charter changes and those things like that, right? So
we
maybe
ready
that's
for,
it.
we ready for a vote?
Well, we got 4, so.
Well, I was going to say maybe that's enough for today, right? I think this was a productive dialogue, and we can revisit this at a later meeting. Yes? Great. Okay.
You did it.
Other business.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
For other business? I just wanted to reread, now that it's back in front of me, the part of our town motto, a welcoming, engaged, inclusive, and resilient community where everyone, regardless of identity, shares in our vitality and benefits from an outstanding quality of life. So, just as a reminder for all of the charges and things that we have to take into consideration, because that's a full sandwich packed right there of a sentence that I think is, it's powerful. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and thank you for always offering reminders on the broader perspective of what we're trying to accomplish as our one small committee in town government. I do appreciate that. Other business. No. Okay. Upcoming agendas. I think based on our conversation last week, we thought that properties might be next up on the chopping block, but given the recent changes, and hopefully if we get Merrill confirmed for next week,
right.
Next week we'll maybe just be speaking with council, and then properties maybe can be ready to go the following week.
That works.
Yeah, okay. The following week will probably also be a short debrief from the select board presentation. We're getting 2 weeks out now, but that's okay. Anything pressing for next week other than speaking with council? No. Okay.
I don't know if this is for this week or next week, but I have something that I feel like I would like to have us talk about at some point.
Okay.
Is for us to look back at the full timeline and count back again and see where we need to be with everything, because I just get really nervous when you were saying and that's in 2 weeks, and I think how close that 2 weeks is to the end, and does that leave time for governance and voting and a final report. So
Yeah.
I just want
Yeah,
Make time to,
our
go through that.
draft? When would you like our drafts to
tomorrow. But I
How's
would
Monday?
But I mean, if we just could maybe take a few minutes to look over that again and really set some goals around making some decisions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe we can even plan to do that next week. Maybe an hour and a half or so with council, and then 20
15
minutes on
minutes,
that.
Sounds nice.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was thinking it. I was feeling it inside.
Deadlines are good.
Yeah. Great suggestion.
It's getting close.
All right. If there's nothing else, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I will make
I
that.
will second that.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Always stand adjourned.
Yay.
All right.